Hi, and welcome back to my shop. Well, I'm on the second step of my screen door project. In the first episode, I dimensioned all of my stock to sort of rough dimensions to let the stress start to get relieved out of these pieces of quarter sawn white oak. And I've left them stacked and stickered in my shop for about 2 weeks, so all of those remaining stresses should be worked out, and now I can get this stuff down to sort of the final working dimensions. Back over at my bench, I've laid down the really long pieces once again. These are the ones that I really want to try my best to get as flat and stable as possible. So laying this down on my bench, as I did just 2 weeks ago, these were dead flat. Now you can see, if I wiggle this back and forth, that there's a little bit of twist to one of the pieces. The other one is actually still pretty much dead flat. There's a little tiny bow in the middle, but for the most part that one stayed pretty stable. So this is just sort of a really good example of why I did that rough dimensioning and ripped these two and then let them sit in my shop, because if I'd already assembled this and then I got this kind of twist, my door would be less than stable. Back in my dimensioning room, these pieces are so long that I actually had to sort of move my jointer out a little bit and push it down so that I can get enough runway for the infeed as well as the outfeed is actually going out the door to my shop. Before I go ahead and do one final jointing on this piece, I'm gonna just put chalk marks all along this one side so that I'll know when the chalk marks are gone that I've milled away any of those high spots and I'm left with a flat board. I've also had to come up with a little bit of a solution to run these through my planer, which is usually on a low cart so that it'll fit under the outfeed wing of my jointer. What I've done is raised the planer up, put it on a couple of sawhorses, and then I'm using infeed and outfeed rollers that I've leveled off to be perfectly in plane with the bed of my jointer. So I'll be able to roll this in, and I've got the cutter head raised up here so you can see how this will slide through. Seamlessly slides through and then gets picked up on the other end with the outfeed roller. So hopefully that will eliminate any potential for a really bad snipe on either end of the board. Now that I have all of my stock milled to 1-inch thickness, I need to rip each piece to the right width, and I also need to lay out the stock so that the grain works well on the door. So going back to my SketchUp model here, I see that I need a 6-inch wide piece on the bottom. These next 3 pieces are all 3 inches wide, and then the top is 3.5 inches wide. Both the sides are also 3 inches, so I'm going to be doing a lot of milling to 3-inch widths. And then I can start thinking about how I'm going to handle the joinery. Now over at my bench, I've got all of my components laid out. I have the sides laid out so that they're actually in the right orientation from when they were ripped apart. I've chosen this piece down here as my 6-inch bottom. I'm going to be able to get 2 3-inch pieces out of this piece of stock, and then I'm going to be able to get my 3 and my 3.5 that's going to go at the top out of this piece of stock. And then this little shorty will be perfectly sufficient for that little middle divider. So I've got everything laid out. I do have one spare piece in case anything goes wrong or I need to test any of the joinery. So I'm ready to start ripping. Since the vast majority of my pieces need to be ripped to 3 inches, I'm going to start with that dimension. Now, one thing I have done here is that I've set my fence so that I'm leaving about a 1/16 of an inch. So it's really 3 3/16 of an inch. And the reason I'm doing that is that in the event I do get a little burning from the blade, I can actually stack these up on end and run them through my jointer to get to that final 3-inch thickness. And that way I know I'm not going to have any saw marks left on the pieces when they're ready to assemble. So now I'll just take the like pieces, these are the 3 inchers, and I'll just gang them together so they're a little more stable. You can see I do have a little bit of burning from the saw marks. So I'll just feed that through the planer, and then that'll give me my final 3-inch dimension, and I'll have a nice clean surface as well. Now that I have all of my stock cut to thickness and width, I need to think about the joinery before I can cut to final length. Now, if you go back to the model that I designed for the store, the joinery I'm using between the rails and stiles is basically just mating rabbets. So you can see I have a rabbet on the stile and a rabbet on the rail that just overlaps like so. And then I'm going to have a domino that goes into each. So I'll have a floating tenon that will hold each of these together. So I'll just slide a domino in there, slide a domino in here, and this is just my test piece that I'm using to make sure that the joinery will work and that all my settings are correct on all of my machinery. Slide that together and I get a nice tight mating fit, and that'll be a good strong joint with plenty of long grain glue surface.